This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company, a landmarks preservation pioneer and a sophisticated urbanist who looks to the future. Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel is a driving force behind the preservation movement in New York. She's chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center and author of a recently published volume, The Landmarks of New York, an illustrated record of a city's historic buildings, and she's my guest today. Welcome. I should have said greetings.
It's great to be here with you,
I'm
Ronnie.
glad to have you. And this is some enormous volume of information. 750 pages. The 5th edition. You started this when? When was the first edition?
About 20 years ago.
And is there a big difference?
This one is the biggest difference of all, because I went to the very beginning, the very first landmarks that were designated, as you may recall, in 1965, the safest ones, the Wyckoff House, Brooklyn Heights, and went through every single landmark and updated them. And as you know, real estate in New York is a movable feast. The changes made were the most difficult part of the book, because as soon as I found one change, it's like a teeter-totter, there was another change taking place. But there are 200, more than 200, new landmarks in this book, and 27 new historic districts, plus a rewritten introduction. So I like to think it is mostly a new book, and a very generous reviewer called it a catalog raisonné of New York, that it catalogs every piece of architectural information, because every single designated landmark and historic district are in this one volume.
Incredible. And it's got pictures and maps.
Every district has a new map. Every landmark has a photograph.
Yeah. And the introduction is compelling. It really gives you a history and a commentary on today and the prospects for the future. Let's talk about what a landmark is. But before that, you said that it started in 1964. Five. And that's because of the furor over the destruction of Pennsylvania Station.
Actually, the first furor was the Metropolitan Opera House, an undistinguished building, but alleged to have had perfect acoustics. And we know as time has marched on how important acoustics are in any musical hall, and people are more and more fine-tuned in their own appreciation of sound.
Which is interesting, because just recently there's a comment about the difficulty of the Philharmonic Orchestra finding a new director because one of the problems is the acoustics. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
So that
people really care.
Yeah.
And the advent of all kinds of music and home sound systems have made them even more.
Yeah. So the Metropolitan Opera used to be on West 40.
I think it was
first. Think about it. Yeah.
I think 37th or 38th or 9th.
Yeah.
I don't recall.
The Herald Tribune, I'm thinking.
Yes. But there was a band of activists and then privileged persons who exerted a lot of pressure on Mayor Wagner.
Yeah.
And he had the courage, because there was rumblings about this long before I was in New York, but of course I know about them, that we had to do something to preserve our built environment. There are some very good books that are called Lost New York. And I've been reading a lot about Stanford White lately, and you realize that most of those buildings of McKim, Mead and White are gone.
Yeah. There's one on 85th Street off of Riverside Drive between, I think it's called the Red House, and it used to be in such terrible condition, and it's basically a very important landmark. But I remember when I was a kid of going to Penn Station because it was so beautiful. we used to go exploring in those days, go to
Really?
Grand Central Station, Pennsylvania Station. It was so beautiful. It is beyond your ability to think of the destruction of that place and the substitution of Madison Square Garden. It's really incredible. So what's a landmark?
A landmark is what a first judged on its architectural significance. There is a Landmarks Commission, as we all know, loyal, faithful, unpaid, pro bono persons who serve in the public interest to help make our city a better place to live. And there are now 106 historic districts. And that is in many ways the heart and soul of this. More than 30,000 properties in New York City. And it has transformed every single neighborhood. Now, when you were growing up, you wouldn't think of that somebody wanted to live at 11th Avenue and 42nd Street. Yeah. Well, you know those beautiful buildings, you know Theater Row. Every neighborhood in each of the boroughs has been touched. So in answer to your question, what is a landmark? There is a lengthy designation process. The public can nominate, the research staff of the commission draws up lists, and they determine what is to be heard. And those things are heard at public hearings where every member of the public is given an opportunity to speak about the merits, or perhaps sometimes lack of merits in their view, of the item, the building to be discussed. Then it is voted on eventually by the commission. They designate it a landmark, and then it goes to City Council for formal approval. And among the 1,206 current landmarks, it is very rare that any designations are ever turned back. It's a very careful and considerate process.
But when they're turned back, they're very often political or real estate, right? I mean, but does a landmark have to be a certain age?
Yes, must be 30 years to be considered. So we're surrounded by some landmarks of tomorrow, but the most recent are buildings like the Seagram Building, Lever House, the Ford Foundation, Marcel Breuer's buildings,
Glass
and so
and stuff. You were honored at a dinner in the Four Seasons at the Seagram Building, and it said that it was the 52nd anniversary of the opening of that restaurant. Well, I worked at CBS in those days, and it seems like yesterday that that building was built. And I remember it because it was bronze. The information on the street was that it was a mistake that it was bronze, and I don't know if that's true or not, that the glass came a different color because we had the Lever Brothers across the street that was green, you know? And it was so interesting, but I couldn't believe 52 years ago. And then, on the other hand, they destroyed Pennsylvania Station when it was only 52 years old. So it gives you a sense of timing that it's, you know, I would have thought Penn Station was here forever.
So did lots of us.
And hope that there would be.
And it is to be hoped there will be less destruction of that kind, in part because so many buildings of that quality are either gone or designated. And there is a great activism. In fact, I think, and I hope you might consider this because you know so much about the political process. After the civil rights movements, starting in 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, May of '54, after the civil rights movements, after the equal rights movements, women's rights, marriage equality, gay rights, one of the great movements in the United States, really having as a catalyst our bicentennial in 1976. We're a very young country. And people started to celebrate that occasion. And when they did, they looked around at the built environment, and this is throughout the country, and started to have a greater appreciation for the places in which they lived and worked and shopped and played, and started to take care of them. 20 years ago, there were 100 landmarks commissions.
Local ones.
In the United States, official ones. There are more than 6,000 now, but there are tens of thousands of community organizations. Just
No, go on. I don't mean to interrupt you, but one of the byproducts of that, or maybe one of the stimuluses to it, is that it's an economic activity. I mean, that it's a revitalization of a city or a neighborhood, and it's economically a very sound proposal.
You will find total agreement here. Preservation has become an economic engine.
Yeah.
Let's take New York City. There isn't the manufacturing that we knew of
Right.
going on here now, but we do have the Seagram building, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Chrysler building, the Statue of Liberty, and on and on. People come from all over the world to see our cultural heritage. In addition to all of our other arts-related things, it has become an economic engine. And one of the great economic engines, and actually Governor Cuomo and Nancy Zimpher, the Chancellor of CUNY, have banded together in seeing the university system as a great economic engine. And it is. In many places, they are the largest employer and reach out with concern for their community.
Are they teaching now historic preservation? And it's a profession now. It's a very important thing. It's also a major land use action, isn't
That
it?
is exactly how I feel. That in the end, this is really about land use and ultimately the human use of human beings, and humane as well. By the way, this book is organized by date of construction. So as the book unfolds, so does the history of New York to a certain extent. Because here we have, in the midst of our extraordinary spires of steel and glass, we have wood frame houses that date to the 1640s and the 1660s. And every building tells a story. Not only who built it and why they built it, but how it was transformed. So in some small measure, it also unfolds the history of our great city.
It's incredible. And you can see then in the progression, the different styles, the materials, as you said, wood, and then what did we go to? Anyway, brownstones, this, that, and every brownstone. Iron, that's the whole Soho attraction.
Cast iron,
Cast iron.
which was the democratization of architecture. Before, every part of a building was done by hand. The next thing you knew, with the advent of cast iron in the mid-19th century, you could order a building the way from a pattern book. You could put together,
like the prefab.
Well, it was the precursor to the first prefab in some ways, and you could put together a style of wonderful buildings that we all know, particularly in Soho, that is known as, by the way, the Soho Cast Iron District. You could put together a building that could be quickly assembled. Now, I noticed that a major development in Brooklyn is now going to be put together with prefab modular buildings. They say it costs the same thing, but it decreases the time by multiples. I'm not certain about the costs.
Right, and the labor that goes into it.
Exactly.
Whether we're going to lose jobs or not, or something like that.
Yes.
But there are cities in the world, in Brazil, a brand new city. I've never been there. It's same as
Brasilia.
Brasilia.
And it is in a remote part of the country, but that too now is celebrating its 50th anniversary.
Is that right? So it's
and
that old.
Brasilia, which at one time had the highest rate of suicide in the world because it was remote and nothing but
all the same
forbidding buildings and so on. Now they are trying to reconstruct, particularly with the new prosperity in Brazil, the capital exactly as it appeared, including the furniture and everything else, because it is a distinct style and known now the world over. So maybe we tend not to like what we have as much as we should when we have it.
But it's also the variety. It's what gives the energy. And I mean, it's boring to see block after block the same, right? And that's what we complain when we talk about public housing or large developments, that it's boring and not particularly attractive.
And not life enhancing.
Right.
But the cityscape in New York, most places are known for their natural beauty. New York is known for its unnatural beauty. soaring towers,
Yeah.
all kinds of materials. But here you have a skyscraper next to a brick building. So you have limestone, brownstone, brick, steel, glass, cast iron, wood shingle, and there is, the side streets, particularly of Manhattan, are built on a grid that are still low rise, that are extraordinary for a city of this sort. And in each of these historic districts, there is a landmarks committee that is very activist. I admire the entire movement for its activism that doesn't stop with the built environment and land use. And I hope everyone collaborates with them, cooperates with them, and understands the purpose. In addition to which, there isn't a building, hardly, that I know of, that hasn't increased in value after its designation.
Yeah.
I can recall 20-ish years ago when major landowners sued individually each of the commissioners for very substantial amounts of money. And as you may remember, I served as the longest term commissioner under 4 mayors. And being, I guess, as outspoken as I am, I still consider that a minor miracle. But the very company that sued us, as soon as they lost the case and opened their hotel, every ad said, "Come to our landmark hotel." So there's a great dichotomy in what they say and what they believe.
think, or what their fear.
Yes.
And then they find out. The designation of districts was, when did that first happen? Because I think that had the greatest impact
agree.
on the land use.
The first district was named in 1965, a very safe district, Brooklyn Heights,
Yeah.
because no one could challenge that. And of course, there are now 106, and a great number that are meant to come on stream. Most recently, a district has been named called the Borough Hall Skyscraper District, very small, 21 buildings, but coming under attack now, and it remains to be seen what the City Council does with that. If it turns back that designation, it will be the first time in 30 years that something has occurred.
Yeah. So when we talk about land use, and then there's always been a tension between the developers, the real estate industry, and the preservationists. And is it out of fear? Is it economic? I mean, there are some examples where they would tear down a building that we really wanted to keep, well, like Penn Station. But, and then they can also take off some of the trimmings. They are obstacles in a way to further designations. Is that true?
Well, from my point of view, it isn't.
Yeah.
But I know there are more than one way to view any issue. But the fact is, the Landmarks Commission has tried, and right now in the process of doing an online application for change. You can't ask for anything simpler or easier than that. Yeah. And the staff really does bend over backwards to help applicants.
This is individual people, right?
Yes.
But
and with historic districts, they're the ones who generally come forth and want it bigger and bigger.
Well, if every historic district is like the West Side, which has Landmark West overlooking and protecting us, is like that, then we have very incredible, strong voices heard.
Well, we do.
Yeah.
But Landmarks West is one of the most interesting and activist.
Yeah. It's a terrific thing.
It is.
Yeah.
But every community has that. They don't often have the number of buildings or the clout or the sense perhaps of entitlement of the Upper West Side.
Well, we always.
But they're really wonderful.
Yeah. But what we really want is, we want to protect this because we believe that it adds value to our lives, right? The beautiful differences and everything else. And you've taken it a step further by saying, if you could identify certain things that happened in buildings or people who lived there, you're bringing it even more personally down to a person who goes past that building. Do you have a project of putting medallions on buildings?
I'd like to tell you about it.
Yeah.
Actually, most people think that a continuity between past and present is really a very good and stabilizing force in life. and some things go on besides mortal existence, and that we are engaged really in preserving the past and a pact for the future. And all good preservationists believe that good architecture should live side by side, good contemporary new architecture. Just the other day I was reading the report of last week's designation and appropriation hearings, certificate of appropriate hearings, and seeing again infill buildings, brand new buildings in major historic districts. That happens all the time. Landmarks, the big myth about landmarks is that they freeze a building. I can tell you that the biggest task in doing this book was updating the change to the 1,206
Yeah, right.
landmarks, because they change all the time.
They're reuse. We're
Well,
sitting
that's-
in a building that used to be B. Altman's department store, and now it's the Graduate Center for the City University. And the building has been very well preserved. I mean, beautiful
Wonderful.
elevators.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So
And a wonderful reuse.
Yeah.
Actually, an earlier book of mine called Buildings Reborn, New Uses, Old Places, helped coin the term of adaptive reuse, together with an architect who was then the master of all that, Giorgio Cavalieri,
yes.
and was one of the first architects of repurposing what was the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society to what is now called the Public Theater, Joe Papp's
right, it's great.
great invention. And it's about to celebrate its 50th anniversary
Incredible.
in appropriate style.
But let's
you
talk
asked
about your medallion.
cultural
Yeah,
medallions.
yeah.
The first, and you asked earlier, what makes a building designated? The first criterion is architectural worthiness. Then there are buildings that are designated because of their historical worthiness. What comes to mind is Charlie Parker's house. Now, the world over, not only jazz musicians and aficionados know the role of Charlie Parker in music. That is an individually designated landmark, as much for his long-term residence there as its simple, straightforward architecture. So the second thing is historic. Then there is another category that the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, which I chair, has created. We call them cultural medallions, a latter-day invention of what has gone on all over the world, like London's Blue Marker, all throughout Italy. Some cities in France, tiny little villages, have every building with a plaque on it because they can trace the
whole
building's history and
yeah.
who was
Right.
there. In any case, in New York, we call them cultural medallions. And the great designer, Massimo Vignelli, one of the world's greatest and most honored graphic designers and architectural firm as well, was good enough to respond to so many of my pleas. He designed all the historic district street signs that, as chair of the different landmark organizations that I helped create, that I did create, and he designed them pro bono. He also designed these terracotta black and white cultural medallions that are affixed to a building. Now, I say that we are much later than London, but we give more information. For example, in London, it will say, Disraeli lived here. Well, I want to know what he did there. For example, the most recent cultural medallion, and by the way, nominations are encouraged from the public.
And invited.
Invited.
And they should, do you have a website?
Exactly.
Yeah.
HLPC culturalmedallions.org. It gives you the history of the program, some examples of cultural medallions, and how to nominate. So I invite, your word is much better than mine, all members of the public to submit worthy and verifiable sites, because we vet our information very carefully. None has been called out yet in error.
We only have 3 minutes left in this interesting discussion I'm having with you. So I want to also say this: there is a future to this, right?
Big future.
And we're teaching, not only do they Is it a professional training in colleges or graduate schools?
Right here in
We're
New York.
teaching grade school children.
Well, I
the
think
value.
that right here in New York, Andrew Dulcart runs a wonderful program at Columbia University in historic preservation. Pratt Institute, that has been so wonderful in preserving its buildings and its outreach to the community, has a marvelous school of historic preservation. But there are now throughout the country, in Delaware, originally because of winter tour and things of that sort. But I'm most concerned right now with our wonderful city of New York. And every historic district has an education committee. The Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for all the historic districts. You can look them up under historicdistrictscouncil.org and become involved in your community
Great.
as well.
And it also, it creates more of a public interest in the participation in this, because people have to realize the buildings that are being built today, 30 years from now, are going to be eligible to be historic districts or historic buildings, right? It's the continuous thing which makes citizens part of a history.
And that is what's so wonderful about the landmarks preservation movement. It cuts across all socioeconomic groups, all age groups, in a common concern for civic activism, pride, and involvement. And that's what we want, a participatory democracy.
Absolutely. It's not just the wealthy neighborhoods of here, but it's the working neighborhoods. It's the style that people used to work in and everything, and it's so important. So we want people to go to the website. We want them to hear your message and wonderful things. We want the city to put up more street signs.
We certainly do. You read the introduction.
Yes. And you in your book called for a commission to study how to improve it with all the new media and the technology that's been developed. There's so many more opportunities to bring landmarks and the appreciation into a home.
Yes.
Yeah. So you really call for this commission.
I do.
Yeah.
In fact, at the 45th anniversary of the passage of the Landmarks Law, there was much conversation about that, and some areas, including Landmarks West, are starting to use apps, other social media, and technology that bring it to everyone. I think all school children should belong to a trust for New York City and be learning about it, and either in cash or kind, becoming a member for $1.
That's a great idea. So let's Google New York landmarks and find your, just generally, so you can see all the different things, but particularly we want you to contribute ideas for the medallions, and we want you to become interested in all of this, the vast field of landmark preservation. Yes?
Perfect.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Barbaralee.
you, Ronnie. As always, you're right, spot on. Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.